in America's history were the largest technological advancements?
There's been several moments where you've had large leaps technologically and scientifically. I would say probably early to mid 20th century.
Great. And what events surrounding the early 20th century do you believe affected these advancements?
There are a lot of factors, and with anything this complex, there's always a variety of factors that have to sort of join up in order to advance particular fields this much in this short a time. Certainly World War I, there's a need or a desire to try and outpace other countries, other nations in terms of wartime technology. So that would have been a major factor. There's also a lot more income for these states. At this point, Britain, Germany, the United States all had sort of mastered deficit spending, which basically means countries that use credit cards, right? Like just borrowing against other countries so that they could put a lot more money into research and development. So as usual, you kind of have to follow the money.
Okay. And what were some specific technological advancements?
There's a whole bunch in this time period. The ones I'm most familiar with as a historian are more military technologies. So that'd be like the German U-boats, submarines, mustard gas, which actually an early form of it was developed for this purpose in World War I, and then later on it's weaponized and developed to become Zyklon B, which is used in World War II. So there's an interesting pattern of developing more and more lethality with a lot of these types of technological advancements.
And how do you believe that these advancements were received by the general public?
I think with a great deal of anxiety. I think there's also with mixed understanding. Most people didn't understand what a machine gun, they understood what it looked like and, what it sounded like, especially if they were enlisted in the military in Europe at this time. Then unfortunately they would have had a lot of experience with machine guns, tanks, airplanes, stuff like that. But I think most people worldwide operated with a great deal of ignorance about how these things actually function. So I think they took on really scary, almost like mythic dimensions.
Okay. Brave New World centers largely around the manipulation of genetics. Were these issues prevalent in the early 20th century, and to what extent?
Yeah, they were. I know a little bit less about this aspect. You would actually be better served interviewing my dad, who's a biologist and was studying not too long after this stuff was happening. So, but genetics, this is tied to advancements in this time period with Mendelian genetics. Nowadays, we know that genetics are way more complex than we thought previously. But back then, there was a feeling of really starting to unlock, life codes and genetic codes, and people did not really understand that. Even the research scientists were just really scratching the surface. We know now, and it appears from a lot of literature from this time period that. That is to say, historical literature, that this fed into policies of eugenics that would be picked up by the Third Reich, by the Nazi Party. And, you see lots of really creepy stuff coming out of the Third Reich with scientists and doctors trying to experiment genetically and phenotypically on subjects, human subjects.
And how was the fear of these genetic technological advancements shown by the public at that time, if it was?
I don't know in what specific ways that fear would have expressed itself. I haven't really researched it. You might find, probably in literature. I don't think there were news stories or a lot of news stories being published about this type of thing. I have done research in the 1920s and 1930s, and I didn't come across a whole lot, although I wasn't really looking for it. So it's possible that it was there. But I think, as is usually the case, it's really the artists of the time period that are more sensitive to these changes. So it wouldn't surprise me if you saw more of this, like with Aldous Huxley, and writers and painters and artists. Actually, I think it comes a little bit later, but there's a famous mural painting that has like some kind of cells and stuff like that going on. I think that was painted by Diego Rivera. So usually it's artists that are kind of ahead of the curve on that sort of thing, and then later on as people educate themselves about it, they're able to explore those fears more
Right.
deeply.
Do you think those fears were in any way justified, and to what? Yeah.
Yeah, I think they were. It's again, it's the 1920s and 1930s. That period that we're talking about is also known as the interwar period, between the two most catastrophic events in human history. Nothing comes close historically, from the Paleolithic through today. Nothing approaches the amount of loss of life and the trauma, psychological, physical, spiritual, that happened in World War I and World War II. When World War I ended, everybody called it the Great War, the war to end all wars. No one could have possibly anticipated that there'd be another even worse calamity, basically around the corner. So a lot of these fears, a lot of these anxieties, they're kind of inchoate, not fully formed, and people couldn't really put a finger on it. But I think that those, again, that were more sensitive to these massive changes, could tell that something was unresolved, and unfortunately would resolve itself really, really violently in World War II.
Do you think that the fears that were there were focused on government and the fear of the government control, or was it a general paranoia among friends and neighbors?
This is a great question, and I think it's both. I think that the thing about fear is that it can be like deeply personal and sort of invasive and sort of psychological at that sort of psychological level. And I think it can also be externalized, and you see both happening in this time period. People, there was a sense of paranoia. We see the same thing after World War II with like the Red Scares and the House Un-American Committees that was like investigating communism and sort of Soviet spies in the United States and that kind of stuff. But what we see is, I think a lot of people blamed, accurately, the heads of state and the countries themselves, these nations that went to war over reasons that most people couldn't really understand after World War I. There really wasn't any one great reason why all these nations were involved in this massive war. So I think there's a fear of at this time that develops about the government and the government's power and its ability to sort of destroy or subvert kind of a more wholesome kind of community. But we see this expressed kind of over and over again after about from this time on.
Earlier you mentioned the Nazi Third Reich.
Mm-hmm.
Did these technological genetic manipulation ever result in anything, or was it a lot of hype?
Result in what?
As in, did any of their experiments work? Were there any results to those?
I mean, it was really, it was bizarre. Most of them were like temporary. Did they exert change on humans? Yeah, they did, by injecting like dye into their eyes to, change the color of their eyes, or to, some other really grisly stuff that, is like way worse than that. Where they were most successful were in like rocketry, aeronautics, that kind of stuff. I don't think they did any. I might be mistaken, but I don't think they did any research that could be considered being of lasting significance or importance to like the field of genetics. But I might be wrong about that. Maybe there was one crazy scientist that like hit on something.
Gotcha. Thank you very much for your time, Mr. Posner.
You're very welcome. Pleasure. Thanks.